When it comes to video games, it's clear that we all seem to love our little animal companions. The entire premise of franchises like Pokemon is to collect every little critter you come across, and even the original Gotta Catch 'em All slogan emphasizes our love for these animals. Pokemon has now gone on to become the highest grossing media franchise of all time. It's a shame that the Pokemon game budgets don't see any of that revenue. Hello and welcome. I am Zerbraxi. When I had stopped making WoW content and returned to variety, I had posted a poll and gave 5 options to see what people would be interested in. Of those options, the number one winner, as kind of a tied for number one winner, but one of those was a video about mounts. So it's time. Let's do it. We're gonna talk about mounts. I'm pretty sure my jokes just keep getting worse. Let's go, if you didn't leave already after that joke. According to dictionary.com, to mount is the act or a manner of mounting. Man, dictionaries are just so helpful. Discussing topics like this is always a bit difficult considering just how many games exist, and there's no doubt that I'll miss something along the way. If you want to add to the conversation, then please don't hesitate to throw your thoughts into that comment section down below. You know, go wild. Across the mainstream video game art form, mounts have become a beloved part of the medium. Most specifically, mounts in the MMORPG genre are key to a lot of the enjoyment that players will have when roaming around the massive worlds created for the online audience. Just take a look at Amazon Game Studios' MMO release, New World. In the first few weeks, not a day went by without a new article pointing out that the title does not have mounts and how it desperately needs them. Whether the game would actually be better with mounts or not is almost irrelevant by this point. Guild Wars 2 launched without mounts, and I know several people who personally wouldn't play the game on that basis alone, despite the world having a massive and extremely flexible fast travel system. Point is, people don't just love mounts in their games. Oh, no. Some players absolutely need them. Like not having an animal to ride triggers some ancient primal instinctual withdrawal along the lines of addiction. So where did mounts actually come from? What are some of the earliest introductions of mounts in games, and where are they now? There's no better mount to start with than the Mario 3 boot, aka Karibo's shoe. Now I know what you might be thinking, but trust me, this one's really gonna kick things off. You might laugh, you may even scoff at the shoe, but let me ask you this one, okay? Can you name me a mount before the shoe that had its own dedicated YouTube video even as far back as 2007, doing nothing more than showing off the absolutely unprecedented potential of this item? Let's not forget either that you can grab a fire flower while you're in the shoe. What a god! Honestly, I don't know how we go up from here. The only way you can best this boot is if Nintendo gave Mario something ridiculous in his next game. Something like a dinosaur. Oh, well that's cool. Yeah, it would be pretty hard to not consider Yoshi as the first real mount in video games. While technically games like Oregon Trail even back in the 70s had mounts, they weren't really interacting with the game in any way. Really, you were just kind of told you had a mount on the wagon, but it didn't actually matter. And then you died of dysentery, even though you actually would have been more likely to die of smallpox. Nerd! Oh wait, that's me. Anyway, Yoshi leapt into the scene in 1990 and wasn't just a side feature. This green dinosaur was featured on the box art itself and even on the opening title screen. It was impossible to play Super Mario World without falling in love with this little thing. What made Yoshi so interesting is how much of a gameplay mechanic they were when introduced to the gaming world. They would give Mario an extra hit to be able to walk across certain blocks that Mario couldn't. Yoshi could eat enemies and hold different colored shells in their mouth for different abilities. For the first famous mount in video games, it's kind of nuts just how complex this introduction was. Yoshi would establish themselves as a staple of gaming, with its own spin-off series including Yoshi's Island, which is arguably one of the greatest platformers ever made. Yoshi even became a mainstay in the Super Smash Bros. Games and is a beloved icon whose real name, by the way, is T. Yoshisaur Munchakoopas. Just when you think they couldn't get any better. Yoshi's existence as a mount and gameplay power-up would set the trend for the 16-bit era. The likes of Kirby, Donkey Kong Country, and Bomberman would all adapt this take with their own interpretations. First came Bomberman 94, which brought with it the Louies, kangaroo animal companions that Bomberman could ride on. Each color of Louie would have its own different ability, yet again serving as mostly a power-up mechanic. Some Louies could run fast, kick bombs over blocks, or even jump over blocks. Donkey Kong Country is probably the most famous here with its animal buddies. While each of these mounts had their own unique abilities, their primary purpose was for unlockables. By cleverly and carefully taking advantage of the animal companion's specific movement abilities, the player could unlock bonus rooms which would be needed for 100% completion. Kirby's Dreamland 3 would take the Donkey Kong Country new benchmark and raise it up a notch with even more animal companions than the DKC trilogy. Most interesting about all the Kirby animal friends has to be that their primary mechanics aren't strictly movement focused, but offer a larger range of potential. Some do have mobility perks, such as triple jumps and scaling walls, but others like Pitch the Bird instead functions off alterations of Kirby's copy abilities. And this brings us to my favorite game of all time, which means you know you can trust me to be unbiased on this one, that's for sure. Yep, I can totally do that. I'm looking right at you. I present to you one of the most legendary mounts in all of video gaming, Epona, from The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time. Oh, she's such a good girl. Epona is truly beloved with her own set of fun trivia, actually. In Ocarina of Time, you were originally going to be able to rename Epona, but that was scrapped last minute. In Twilight Princess, you can do this, and while it was fun to rename the hero's horse, many fans actually pointed out that this was probably a bit blasphemous. This was the greatest steed of all, by the way, not just some other dumb horse. This was Epona, the great legendary mount. See? I told you I could be fair and unbiased. Funny enough though, in Breath of the Wild, if you unlock Epona and attempt to rename her, the guy at the stand will proclaim that yes, this is in fact a legendary steed and you will not be allowed to change her name. See? This guy gets it! Epona in Ocarina of Time is completely optional, but unlocking her via the Lon Lon Ranch race does in fact allow you to traverse Hyrule much more effectively. The fact you obtain Epona via learning her song as a child and playing it to use her in the race as an adult also adds another wonderful theme of time from that game. Unfortunately though, this is it. Epona serves simply as a movement speed increase. This here is now the trend that would be set for mounts in gaming. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time changed the face of the industry forever. That's a very large topic for another day, but one of the negative influence it had that I would argue is simply turning mounts into nothing more than an animalistic speed buff. The Elder Scrolls series, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, and many more would do absolutely nothing to improve on this mount idea for literally decades. It's almost insulting how little was actually done, and it actually wouldn't take that much time to improve on this functionality of what could be a mount in a video game. Alas, these titles did almost nothing. While WoW and FF14 would eventually add multi-passenger mounts, which are cool, I guess, the reality is that this was basically it until World of Warcraft Battle for Azeroth introduced mount equipment. Unfortunately, this too is insanely basic, and the most impressive mount equipment was that you could now get your steed some water wingies, and it could run on water. Woo. I do have to give World of Warcraft The Burning Crusade some credit though, since I am selling it a bit short. In 2007, Blizzard introduced to the MMO world the Flying Mount, a Pandora's box of pros and cons of game design and map exploration. One thing can't be taken from WoW though, and that's the fact that flying did open up a whole new potential for level design. While The Burning Crusade did a very basic job of this by tucking away dungeon and raid content behind flying, the Wrath of the Lich King expansion took amazing advantage of this with the quest design in Icecrown and Storm Peak zones. Adding a level of verticality allowed the world to feel harsher and less hospitable, which Blizzard took wonderful advantage of here. However, it's important to note that all of these games didn't actually expand upon the idea of mounts being more than a speed boost. At their core, this is still all mounts were, and while clearly sufficient, it's still a bit disheartening to a degree that this is all they were seemingly destined to be. Except Oblivion, that game introduced Horse Armor DLC, and that actually changed the face of gaming more than we will ever know. But who cares if mounts are nothing more than a glorified speed boost? That's really all we want, we just want to go zoom, that's it. And for some of you, that might be true, but for a lot of people, especially designers, even all the way back to 1997, designers were coming up with new and creative ways to make mounts more interesting. How, you might ask? Well, by making mounts an entire progression system in and of themselves. While Nintendo would release Ocarina of Time in 1998 and change the face of gaming, another game would come a year before it and change the landscape just as much. Introducing Final Fantasy VII, a JRPG on the PlayStation 1 that has arguably influenced every RPG to come since. Without going too deep into the accomplishments of this legendary masterpiece, still totally staying unbiased by the way, let's take a quick look at its mount system. Final Fantasy has these cute as heck yellow creatures called Chocobos. They're adorable and have some of the most fun theme songs ever made. The Chocobo of Final Fantasy VII, and to a lesser extent FF9, seem like the natural evolution of the animal buddies that Yoshi inspired from the SNES era. Take something that exists as a game mechanic, spring some of that oh-so-sweet RPG on it, and bam! Progression system. By partaking in games in the Golden Saucer and other activities, you can raise up your Chocobo. They can grow to gain more and more abilities as indicated by their color. Yellow, blue, green, black, and gold. As the colors progress from yellow to gold, the birds will be able to navigate through more and more of the open world. Some can walk in shallow water, cross rivers, climb mountains, and some even have the ability to run across the ocean. Final Fantasy IX does expand upon this formula slightly, but the only real addition worth mentioning here in this video is that eventually your Chocobo can fly. You know, it's not that big of a deal. The purpose for all this Chocobo breeding and growing is to unlock access to more areas which can grant you new items, abilities, and in the legendary case of Final Fantasy VII, eventually the Knights of the Round Summon. Essentially, the game's own internal cheat code. Final Fantasy took the idea of mounts to a whole new level. Granted, the Chocobo raising was almost entirely optional, but by evolving the gameplay mechanic to its own progression system, that helped further emphasize the strength of RPGs. This change paved a whole new path for what could be. You can kinda see why I'm so bummed by the fact that World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV still just make them speed boosts. Coming off the heels of Final Fantasy VII, Sega would throw its own hat in the ring and create an RPG for the Sega Saturn. Considered by many to be the most underrated and arguably one of the most unappreciated games of all time, this title would push the framework another step forward, Panzer Dragoon Saga. This title is often considered one of the best RPGs ever made, but so few people have actually had the opportunity to experience it. While this video is not the time or place for a Panzer Dragoon Saga retrospective, we do need to take some time to delve into the dragon mount. Yeah, you get a dragon to ride, basically immediately, and you even fight with it.
I also now agree, this is the best RPG ever made.
Yeah, quite possibly the coolest thing is that the dragon in Saga isn't just a mount for the player, but acts essentially as its own party member. There's a lot to the system of the dragon, but we're gonna briefly hit the key points here. The evolution of the progression system set by Final Fantasy VII becomes clear, as the dragon can experience and level up. Along the way, it can even learn new abilities and even change classes. Each class of dragon has its own unique abilities, techniques called berserk techniques, and their own stat allocations with strengths and weaknesses. Yeah, this is genuinely a real party member on your team. No exaggeration or dramatic claim for the sake of video. Something even more nuts? You can change its class at any time during gameplay. Yes, any time. Even during battle if you wanted to. This is truly an absolutely wonderful next step to what mounts could be in games. At least in single player titles. These are no longer just an extra hit like Yoshi, but entire characters in and of themselves with massive influence over the experience. Oh, and you also get to pet the dragon each time you visit the camp and unlock the hidden Astral Phantom's extra class berserk technique.
I mean, I personally never beaten the game, so I have absolutely no idea what that move thing is, but it sounds pretty cool though, right?
This is now where things really started to slow down in terms of development. For quite a while, mounts were nothing more than a horse to run around on. The insane popularity of World of Warcraft influenced games to follow the established formula of what worked for rideable steeds in video games. Just as Ocarina of Time before it, the insane success of a game seems to have halted the progression for designers to consider mounts in new and unique ways. There were some occasional alterations along the way, but nothing really major. The absolutely phenomenal Shadow of the Colossus release during this window. In many ways, the horse aggro is like an Epona Plus. She mostly serves as a means of transportation similar to Epona, but develops more as a gameplay mechanic and a character by making some very slight touches. Probably the thing that's most unique about aggro is that she doesn't always obey the exact command given by the player. The resistance is subtle most of the time, but it ensures that maneuvering aggro isn't always exact, and she can defy your actions from time to time. Again, this is relatively subtle, but these imperfections intelligently serve to ensure that she has more character. Aggro Aggro feels like a real, living animal that is part of your journey. While this ability for your mount to be able to defy you sounds horrible in principle, it's proof that it's done well considering the overwhelming love that pours out for Aggro every single time Shadow of the Colossus is brought up. She too is such a good girl. God of War 2 also went on to do something unique with the Pegasus mount, but only for like a single level. In the sequence where Pegasus ferries you to the Island of Creation, he can act as a platform essentially while you move through the air, killing everything in your path. You know, something that Kratos does on the weekends. This is pretty much it though. Just wanted to point it out because it's kind of a pretty cool part, I guess. The Witcher 3 would also attempt to model Geralt of Rivia's horse named Roach after the famous Epona and Aggro. While not as iconic as the first two, just by having a name by watching Geralt interact with Roach as often as he does, it's really hard to not consider Roach as a character itself as part of the story. While many Roaches exist throughout the Witcher series, and at this point it seems like more of a title than an actual name, it's a small touch that keeps this horse of Rivia in the special place in our hearts. Horizon Zero Dawn then came around and became one of the coolest open world games ever made. When it comes to mounts, however, it also doesn't do too much. The creatures, yet again, only really serve as a speed boost and a means of transportation. What does make Horizon's approach somewhat unique at least is that Aloy must confront and hack the creatures, meaning that you're constantly recycling mounts throughout the game. I mean, I guess that could count as gameplay?
I think you can start to see the trend here. Mounts in games are kind of an afterthought. They are nothing more than an increase to the player's movement speed. And that's fine, but it's a real shame that there hasn't been some more innovation on that. Well, thankfully, that's not where this story ends. Or it's only thankful if you've enjoyed watching thus far. I mean, if you hate it and you're still watching, then I appreciate your masochism.
It's important to note that this entire video is functionally attempting to push the potential of what mounts can be. Let me be clear, not every mount has to be something fascinating or game-changing. Epona serving as a horse is fine, and there are contexts when that's all you'd ever want. However, I tend to live by this mantra of, it could be better. Video games need to continually evolve and adapt, just like any other art form. Even the most basic and inconsequential elements of a title should be questioned and analyzed. Hence, the creation of this video, where I have quite literally been rambling about rideable creatures in a digital space. There are so many examples of mounts and animal companions. There are plenty that live and last with the player. For example, the horse in Red Dead Redemption 2 functions not only as a mode of transportation, but also as an extension of your inventory. By also giving the player the ability to choose their trusty steed, the medium accomplishes the goal of creating an emotional bond between the player and fostering a mechanical attachment as well. While not really a mount, so to speak, and more of an animal companion, the ultimate service of this idea thus far has to be Trico from The Last Guardian. Oh, hey there, Trico. I have been looking for an excuse for a long time to talk about you. You are such a good boy! Trico has the honor of being one of the weirdest yet cutest animals in all of gaming. While there are mounting sections, it's essentially a partner throughout the puzzles of The Last Guardian. Trico serves as possibly the greatest example of narrative and mechanical connection to an animal. But what about the best mounts specifically? Where has this evolution taken us? While it's not the most recent game to release, there is a current best when it comes to the mechanical impact of mounts in video games. 2017 saw the release of Guild Wars 2: Path of Fire. With this expansion came mounts into the game, and wow, they are truly unmatched. I would argue that mounts are at their best when considered as an extension of the player's goals. That's some nice fluff words for saying what a mountable creature should be is an extra tool that gives the player the ability to exert their own will onto the game in new and meaningful ways. There we go, that's a better definition. While the MMO genre has mostly carried the forward potential of what mounts can be, Guild Wars 2 has pushed that so far above the rest that it's hard to compare ArenaNet's creation to its competitors. World of Warcraft, The Old Republic, Elder Scrolls Online, Final Fantasy XIV, they all present mounts in a way that paints them as nothing more than a slight speed increase. While they functionally work just fine, and some may argue that going from A to B is the only important element, I would challenge you to think like a designer and question how you can make that trek from A to B more interesting and more engaging to the player. This exact philosophy and line of questioning is what spawned the Guild Wars 2 mount system. There are less mounts than other games, but they are instead split into families. At the time of the recording, we have the Raptor, Springer, Skimmer, Jackal, Griffin, Warclaw, Skyscale, and Roller Beetle, with the Siege Turtle coming in the End of Dragons expansion. The first time that you mount one of these creatures, you'll immediately feel the difference, as they operate almost more like a vehicle of sorts. Movement is natural and smooth, and each family has its own unique abilities and functionality. For example, raptors are pretty quick, but also have the ability to leap long distances over gaps. Not only do they have this movement available, but they also can get you into combat with an attack skill that AoE pulls any enemy hit by the raptor's tail swipe. This continues to the Springer, which can jump high, but also crashes into combat for extra damage. Skimmers can hover over water or hostile ground environments and even swim underwater. Jackals teleport. Roller Beetles are pod racers that shoot you through a map at the speed of sound and have created their own side game called Roller Beetle Racing. Every mount has its own catch and limitations, essentially expanding upon the same design philosophy of video games' class design, where unique roles have flaws that other roles can fill. Guild Wars 2's mastery system also emphasizes more of this. The masteries are basically upgrades to certain elements of the game and are obtained by doing more within the world. Each family of mount has its own upgrade tree. The Springer, for example, can upgrade its combat entering attack to add 2 seconds of knockdown, which can be super useful when engaging a hard creature by giving you some free time to beat it up. However, upgrading one mount doesn't just help itself, but can also synergistically benefit the others as well. If you were to say get your Raptor mastery up enough to unlock the trait Ravenous Discipline, this increases the damage of all of your other mounts' combat entering abilities. Unlocking the Skimmer's Nimble Benevolence also adds swiftness and protection buffs when getting dismounted or when using a mount combat ability. What makes this so wonderful is that upgrading my Springer not only helps itself, but also all my other mounts in my arsenal. Many might see mounts like the Griffin or Skyscale and immediately assume that flight would bypass much of the functionality of all the other mounts. I mean, kind of, but seriously, not really. Flight is limited, and in almost all cases, using the mount that is specifically built for the job will be the far better and more efficient choice. However, much can be said about the Griffin and the gameplay surrounding it. Mastery of the Griffin's flight potential and knowing what landscapes to take advantage of can be some of the most satisfying gameplay ever, as you utilize flight and physics to traverse the world in a way that most games would never dream of letting the player do. While Guild Wars 2 certainly has its own problems, the mount and mastery system pushes the possibility of rideable animals and vehicles in video games. The distance between Guild Wars 2 and the other examples is so massive that not even a raptor would be able to make that leap. However, it's not necessarily about being better or being perfect here. The real reason I wanted to touch on these mounts so much is because ArenaNet has taken a simple mechanic and scrutinized it in a way that designers and players never did before. Mounts are awesome. We all love them. Seeing what Guild Wars 2 has done makes me now ask a new question. If they could push a slight speed boost mechanic to this extreme, if Yoshi could become a Guild Wars Raptor, then what other mechanics exist in video games that are nowhere near their final form? It's about time we start keeping our eyes out.
Yes, you caught me. This entire video was an excuse to talk about the Guild Wars 2 mounts. That's true. Yeah, definitely, yeah. Guilty. Another cool thing is that this video was voted on by the community, so thank you for voting and for picking this. It was a lot of fun. I actually kind of like this dynamic where I put out a poll and sometimes people get to choose what video I'm going to make next or even just down the road. Kind of forces me to be a little creative, and it helps you kind of have some direction on what I make and what you see, so I appreciate that. Keep an eye out for more polls and keep an eye out for way more to come. I appreciate it, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye! I still don't know why I did this mount joke.